Hi friends, hope everybody is doing great, staying safe. This whole COVID saga, it's driving me nuts. I don't know, COVID 1, COVID 2 has more sequels than the Terminator, but it's killing me. Mask on, mask off. It's just crazy. Anyways, I wanted to speak today about ego. And I heard a fable recently and talk about ego, but I thought that I could rewrite it and I altered it a bit, and I think it's more applicable to what I have to say today. There was an island. This island was not inhabited by people, but rather by positive emotions. So there was hope, inspiration, gratitude, love, the whole list. I can't think of the whole list right now, okay? And then on this island one day, ego drops in. Because after all, nobody knows him there. They're all so positive and happy, and it's like a good place. They didn't recognize and acknowledge me, so I'll go there so they can all see how fabulous I am. So ego shows up on the island. Not long after, sometimes they say, oh, you brought in the sunshine or you brought in the bad weather. Well, sure enough, ego showed up. And there's a weather report that the island is about to be swept over by some storm or some tsunami, whatever it is, but they had to escape the island. So love decides to step up and says to itself, I am going to build a boat and I'm going to save everybody. So it does so. Day and night. They had a little bit of time before the weather would step in, and love builds the boat. And it's getting dark and cloudy, and they realize that report soon is, going to manifest, come to be. Everybody gets on board. But love always accounts for everybody it loves. And it realizes that ego is not on the boat. So it says, we can't leave yet. Ego is not on the boat with us. Everyone says, leave the ego behind, leave him behind. But love couldn't do it. Couldn't leave ego behind. Jumps off the boat, goes looking for ego. Sure enough, ego is at the bar. He's having a drink. He's lamenting his life. And love says, you need to leave. We're all on the boat. The storm is going to come. Please come. Ego says, I'm not getting on that boat. How dare everybody get on the boat before me? I'm a guest in this town. Preserving his ego. I'm not getting on that boat. Go. All of you, go. But love doesn't give up, right? Love doesn't give up. A lot of things in life give up, but hold on a sec. Love doesn't give up. So it's trying back and forth. The one thing about ego, though, it's so darn stubborn. So love is also wise. And love hits a vulnerable point in ego and says, ego, whose whole thing is about self-preservation, if you don't get on that boat, you're going to die. All of a sudden, ego feels it. Fine, I'll come. Ego goes, but as he's approaching the boat and he's there and he sees everybody sitting, he's like, I'm not getting on this boat until everybody gets off because I should be the first to board. Love, inspiration, hope, happiness, all these positive emotions say, fine, no problem. They get off the boat, and ego gets on. But just as ego takes his seat on the boat, it sinks, hits a rock, and crashes. It destroys the only means of savior. The storm comes, and everyone dies. Now, if only ego would have left the weight of his own self-importance on the shore, then everything and everybody would have survived. Ego, the weight of its own arrogance and self-importance. How many of us in our own lives have been a part of a story where ego was holding the reins? I'm not making up with them. I'm not. They started it. They have to talk to me first. I'm not going to their wedding. They gave me such a bad present at my daughter's wedding. There's no way I'm going to their wedding. Brothers, sisters not talking for 30 years. Mothers and daughters not talking for more than that. Sibling rivalry, all for the reason It was so small, the reason. I'm not talking to them on principle. It's on principle. What's the principle? Principle is the platform of your ego. How many of us have destroyed our lives? The opportunity for great things. We throw away occasions, great friends, great possibility, great joy, great everything. Why? Because of ego. Because it is so busy in its own self-preservation that it destroys itself, and everybody else along with it will go down. It's so interesting. I was researching ego this week, and I found that a few years ago there was a campaign in a summer camp, a Jewish summer camp, where the kids started a hashtag campaign about ego. So what was the campaign? It was called, "I silence my ego in order to." So hold on, let me get the book. Okay, so I silence my ego in order to. Because when has ego ever done anything good? So here are a few things that filled in the blanks. I silence my ego in order to connect with God. I like that one. It's the most important one, and it is, and it's not, and it is, but I'll get back to it. You know, you can't say anything without being scared on the video, because then you have 5,000 people telling you, how could you say that? And that would compete with how many comments I get on you should do your hair this way and your makeup that way. But thank you for your input, because I told you I do welcome it. It just makes me laugh, because men don't get those same types of comments. Okay, I silence my ego in order to love everyone. Okay. I silence my ego to notice the positive. Don't worry, I don't have that many more. I feel like one of those, those evening hosts where they had those cards like, what's his name? Jay Leno and all those, they always have these types of things. I silence my ego in order to respect others. I like that one. For me, this was the most important. Even connecting to God took a step back on this one. I silence my ego in order to free myself. Now, I don't know what you would fill in the blank with, and it's really something to think about. Because if you get rid of your ego, how much better will your life be? What problem will you resolve? Something to think about. For me, free myself, because if you free yourself and kind of get rid of your ego, then once you're free, you can actually really serve God. You could serve your neighbor, your friend, and everything else properly. So for me, it starts with like freeing myself. Because even we see with the Jews in Egypt that they really couldn't serve God until they were actually freed themselves. And then they could serve a God and, other things. So I just found that very interesting. So how does it all come around to this week's parasha? This week's parasha, we read about the last, which is called Bo, Parashat Bo. We read about the last 3 plagues. And still Pharaoh has a hardened heart. And why? Last week I spoke about habit. It was a bad habit of Pharaoh to say no. But what was the platform upon which Pharaoh built his habits? It was ego. Pharaoh did not just think he was like the leader of a country. Pharaoh believed that he was a god. Pharaoh believed that he himself created the Nile. And Pharaoh believed, actually, that he created himself. His ego was so powerful, so strong, that he denied God. Not only God, but that very God that created the world with 10 utterances. God created the world with 10 sentences. And we see that God, in his full force of giving justice, measure for measure, midah keneged midah, punished Pharaoh with 10 plagues. The same Pharaoh that denied a God who created the world with 10 utterances. He was so egotistical, so absorbed in himself, that he didn't know that there was anything in the world that existed other than himself. He bathed himself in the blood of Jewish children to cure his leprosy, or a skin disorder that he had. So that's why actually it's interesting that there are many times where God says to Moses, go and see Pharaoh in the morning at the Nile. Why at the Nile? Because Pharaoh also convinced all his countrymen that he was a god. And he didn't want them to know that he had human functions, bodily functions. So he did his business in the Nile. So God said to Moses, on purpose, go there in the Nile, that he should be humiliated while he does all his bodily needs in the Nile, that he should know that we know you're not a god. But the thing is that he convinced his countrymen that he's a god, and he convinced himself that he's a god. And he denied the real God. Ego, ego, ego. Now, I would like to tell you that ego ends well, because we all want to have like an ego and fortify it and nurture it. But the moral of the story is it didn't end well. So then we all have to rethink it. And me included, it took me 12 hours to get ready for this video because I had nothing to wear. Probably ego has something to do with that. We all have to work on it. 12 is an exaggeration. It's a, what do they call it? A creative hyperbole. You're like the license to exaggerate. But that being said, Pharaoh was in good company. Good, with quotation marks, meaning not, in the Bible. How many other people in the Bible had a huge ego, but you know what? It didn't end well for them. So there was Haman, who was richer than the king. Richer than the king. He had everything and 10 sons, and the man should be happy. Couldn't take it because Mordechai, the one Jew, didn't bow down to him. Boy, that was an ego problem. But you know what happened to Haman? We know. Him and his sons hung on the gallows. Then there was Avimelech, who was a judge in Israel, who killed all his brothers to secure his own position, which he usurped to begin with. But then a woman threw something on his head that was heavy, and it was a mortal wound. He was about to die. But he asked his sword bearer, I think it was his sword bearer, to kill him, so that in history he should go down as being killed by a man and not by a woman. But, you know, the Torah is not forgiving, so it exposes his ego and the whole story. Avshalom, the son of King David, gorgeous man, long hair, so proud, he decided, because of his ego, that he wants to kill his father, make a war, be the king. Nobody else should be king other than him. Killed his own brother for other reasons, but at the end of the day, his ego was the dominant force in his life. He was killed, Haman was killed, Avimelech was killed, and now we're back to Pharaoh. Well, his story didn't end so well either. Pharaoh. Who was put up against Pharaoh? Oh, interesting. Just to go back to Proverbs. It says, pride goes before ruin, arrogance before failure. So pride and arrogance, they are not winning ingredients in our life. In fact, we are taught by the rabbis that arrogance is just a manifestation of the fact that you do not know your place in this world. So who was set against Pharaoh to bring down his arrogance, his ego? I'm so important, I am so fantastic, I created myself. There's a joke, I just remembered it, but I hope I say it. He's a self-made man, and he honors his creator. Pharaoh just believed that he was everything. So who was sent to bring down that powerful, big ego? Moses. Who was Moses? Moses was the most humble man that ever lived. He was a begrudging prophet, a begrudging messenger of God. He told God, send somebody else. I'm of heavy tongue, I can't speak properly. Send somebody else. All of us, we're all running for the fame and the glory. We don't care if we're competent. How many people lie on their resumes? We don't care. We fake it till we make it. Moses didn't want to be that messenger. God sent someone like Moses to neutralize and to bring down Pharaoh and all of Egypt. Because ego is never our friend. I think of the analogy of a balloon. The balloon, a gold balloon, it's sparkly and it's in the air in the sky, and it's laughing at the air and the sky around it, and it says, look at me, I'm a gold balloon. And the sky says back to it, yes, but please know that what's inside of you is exactly what's outside here, which is air. And there is one day when the air will come out, and you will just be a shriveled, nothing balloon at the end. But what did you do with that air inside of you? When you were lofty, in a golden cage, in a golden Mercedes, in a beautiful home, you were gorgeous, you were muscular, you were strong, you were rich. What did you do when you were in that golden balloon? Did you pollute the air inside? What did you do with the air? Not only that, when you are just acknowledging the balloon, the golden balloon, does that make you better than the vast expanse that's outside you? No, you're just limiting yourself. And that's what ego does. Ego is not a friend to man. But then we have to look at the other side of the story. One, we know God, he prefers humility. He wants humility. He picked Moses. But then he gave the Jewish people the most important book in history, the loftiest book that we can ever know and we can ever read. In fact, the Torah is the only reason that God created the world. It said that if somebody will stop studying the Torah at any time during a day, that the whole world will revert to non-existence, because the whole raison d'être of this world is the Torah. So did God give the Torah, this great gift, the greatest gift that humanity ever got? Did God give that Torah on Mount Everest? He gave it on Mount Sinai, which is a symbol and a lesson to all of us. It was a respectable mountain. It wasn't a valley. We didn't have to go into a ditch to go get the Torah. It was a mountain. It got its kavod, its respect, but it wasn't the highest mountain. Because even in how we receive the Torah, we have to learn about humility. It's not all about me. It's also about me, but it's not all about me. But then there is the flip side of ego. Big ego, a huge ego. Actually, I'm laughing because I remember now a video that Chabad did, and it put Pharaoh into therapy. And it says, hi, my name is Pharaoh, and not I'm an alcoholic, but his big problem is like he's an egomaniac. And that God gave him those 10 steps, the 10-step program to redeem him, to rehabilitate him. But you know what? Rehab is not for everybody. And Pharaoh was one such failure. He sent him the 10 plagues. He wouldn't yield. He couldn't break the ego, the shell that was, hiding the light in him and letting the light come in. So humility is really the beacon of light, the hope, the model of emulation. How do we know? Because, Moses is our role model at the end of the day. But the flip side is not to be having such a fragile ego that you feel like, I'm not going to do it. You're like paralyzed by your own fear, because where there is fear, there is no faith. And it's kind of the same disease, because when you're so big and you're so lofty and I have such a great ego, really you can't be a real friend to anybody, and nobody can be a real friend to you. First of all, everybody's going to hate you because your ego is so big. But also, how can you be a real friend? I'm the most beautiful. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the most beautiful of them all? And every day the mirror told the evil witch that she was, until one day she wasn't, and she went nuts. When your ego is so big, everything's a threat. They're smarter, they're prettier, they're richer, they're younger. Whatever they have that you are missing, that can break you. So it's a preservation of self. The same thing when you have a very low, deflated ego. I'm not doing it. I'm afraid to speak in public, which I was, and I still am. I'm too fat to go out there. My voice is not so great, or whatever it is, like things that are like bringing you down. And not to become a famous singer on Broadway, but my voice isn't good enough, and my skills on the guitar aren't great enough to go sing in the community center to elevate the old people, or to bring happiness, or to do a mitzvah. I'm not good enough. We learn that results are in God's hands, but the actions have to be in ours. Okay? Did God send the best speaker in the world to liberate the Jews from Egypt? No, he did not. He sent Moses, who was heavy of tongue. And when Moses said, I am heavy of tongue, send somebody else, God said to him, is it not me who makes the dumb dumb and the blind blind, and whatever, I'm going to put words in God's mouth. How arrogant and ego is that? It's me who makes the results. The results and the success are in my hands, so just go do it. That's what we have to do. We see Moses, number one. He couldn't speak. He was the one who liberated the Jews from Egypt. Not a sweet talker or a PR campaign. Moses, of heavy tongue, who was actually, I have to throw this in because it's killing me because I know it, who was the voice of God. And when Moses actually learned the Torah, and God gave the Torah, Moses' speech impediment actually disappeared. But if you take the letters of Pharaoh's name, and it's just to like counterbalance again both of them, Pharaoh, if you permutate the letters, is Pe-ra, a bad mouth, like an evil tongue. That's what Pharaoh was. And Moses was the complete opposite. In any case, so that's the example of Moses. Then there was David, who was King David, who was not king yet. He was of small stature, a shepherd boy. King David decided that he had to stand up for God because the whole army of Saul's army were terrified of Goliath. King David decided, in his small everything about him, his position in life and his body, whatever, he was small. He went up against Goliath. God saw that. He was the one who defeated Goliath. Slingshot, little David. Moses' Egyptian mother, his adoptive mother, she knew the decree of her father to kill all the firstborns. She saw a basket. She knew what was in it. She wanted to save the child inside. She couldn't reach, well beyond her reach, but she put out her arm. And God made a miracle, and she was able to bring the basket in. These are all midrashic stories, so somebody, because it happens at times, people will say, well, I looked at the Torah, and I didn't see it written in there. So let me just tell you one thing that makes a Jew a Jew. It's not only the Torah, because a lot of religions believe, some will call it the Old Testament, we call it Torah, the 5 books of Moses. That is not what makes a Jew a Jew. It's the oral Torah that came along with it, that gives all the explanations, that tells us what we have to do. And people will say, well, that's convenient. That's a way of the rabbis telling you what to do. That's not the case. The case is imagine yourself in a classroom. You have a choice. Here's the book, try and pass the course. Why do we even need school? Read a book, take a test. We need a professor to tell us, to bring the pages alive, to explain to us what's in there. And we spent hours taking notes from the oral teachings. Well, the same was true of the Torah, but even more so, because everything's more so when it comes to Judaism and the Torah. God gave us the 5 books of Moses, and he gave Moses the oral Torah, all the lessons, all the explanations. Like tefillin. Jews put on tefillin. Where is it written? In the Torah itself, the hard copy. It's not. It's passed on. It says like the arms, put the signs upon you. What signs? What are you talking about? How do you know a sign? I can't put a billboard over here. What sign? We need the oral Torah to tell us what it means to be a Jew, because Judaism is not theoretical, it's practical. Lahavdil bein kodesh l'chol, that makes the difference between us all. So that's a major sidestep, but because I get emails, people will, where is that written? Where is that written? Usually it's people who are not of the Jewish faith because they're familiar with the Old Testament and they're wondering why I'm saying what I'm saying. Well, I'm telling you that the oral Torah is what makes Judaism Jewish. Maybe I misphrased that and there'll be another 12 people writing to me to say that that was misrepresented. But basically, that's the fundamental of Judaism, is the oral Torah. So all the power you tried to take away from your rabbis, I just gave it back to them, because all this is told in the Torah, that we have to listen to the rabbis and the judges of our time. It's all written. Your rabbi didn't make up things to torture your life, so you shouldn't go shopping on Shabbat. Okay, back to where we started. So we have to do what we have to do. We have to make the action. The Jews come to the sea, and the Red Sea, and the Egyptians are behind them. And they're praying and they're crying, and God says to Moses, "What are you talking to me for? Go in." So there was one man, Nachshon, who took the first step into the ocean, into the sea, whatever you call it. I'm in Florida, everything's an ocean. And it opened into, there is not one miracle in the Tanakh that is not started by a man, a human being, a woman, a man, by a person. Because God, He doesn't need to prove He can do miracles. All the wondrous things are not for Him. We are in this world to bring Him into the world. This world is for us. So we have to take the first step in life. So do not be fearful. Because having a deflated ego is as bad as having an inflated ego. The problem with both is they don't recognize God. The inflated ego is, if you would know God and you would know your place in this world and not be arrogant, you would know your place and you wouldn't be so puffed up. You wouldn't be like the chametz, like the bread that we're not allowed to eat on Passover. Another symbol of humility is the matzah. You wouldn't be so puffed up. And also, the one who has no self-confidence, you wouldn't feel so small if you knew who walked beside you. The spirit that animates you, God Himself, is with you. Just make the first kosher move in your life and He will bless you. Do not be fearful to move forward. You see, leaving Egypt is not just about not bowing down to Pharaoh and serving Pharaoh. It's easy to take the Jews out of Egypt, but can you take the Egypt out of you? Mitzrayim is the word for Egypt. The root of that word, metzer, means constricted, which means narrow, which means that there's always something in our life that's holding us back, that's keeping us down. And it's not for nothing that we read in the Haggadah and Pesach that in every generation we have to feel like we personally were liberated from Egypt. Each morning when we daven, we read, "Thank you, God, for not making me a slave." And we have to imagine when we read that we are not in Egypt. Because it's not shackles and taskmasters that can necessarily make you a slave. It's Mitzrayim, the narrowness of your thinking. You yourself can turn yourself into a slave to your own fears, to your own habits, to your own insecurities, to your own small ego. What's the remedy for all of this? Cling to God. And it's hard. I struggle, everyone has their own ego. If I won't do it, who will do it? God is so precise. There are no accidents. There are no rewards in your life that you're not deserving of, and no penalties or punishments that you're not deserving of. From digging into your pocket and pulling out a quarter when you needed a nickel, to the person before you put in a lot of money in the meter and now you don't have to pay. Everything is from Hashem. It's interesting because in the parasha we learn how land disputes were resolved by the plagues. There was a dispute between ancient Egypt and Ethiopia. Now don't look at your maps now and tell me that they're not borders. We're talking ancient Egypt and ancient Ethiopia. What was the land dispute? Land is mine, the land is mine. Something like we hear today. This land is my land, this land is your land. So what resolved the land dispute? The plague of the frogs. God made frogs all throughout Egypt, a terrible plague. But not one frog hopped across the border to Ethiopia. And by the circumference or the ratio or whatever the word is, wherein the frogs were, those actually were the borders of Egypt. Not one leg, not one toe of a frog went to another country because the plague was upon Egypt, because God knows how to deliver exactly what's coming to you. The plague of the locusts. The plague of the locusts, so interesting. Firstly, the locusts were all over Egypt, and it was one plague that actually didn't bypass the Jewish people. The difference was, I don't know if you know, but locusts, grasshoppers of some definition, are actually kosher. So, a certain variety of locusts were in Egypt to plague the Egyptians, but the area wherein with the Jews lived, the ghetto, their isolation to preserve their own identity, Goshen, there was a different type of locust, a kosher locust. When God said that the plague is done, there was not one locust left in Mitzrayim. Not one. So that anybody could say that God got it wrong. When God wanted to kill the firstborn, you see, it's us who doesn't understand the pure measurement of God, so we think our ego has to step in and take over. When God wanted to kill the firstborn of Egypt, it's written that Moses says that around midnight, the finger of God will come and it'll hit Egypt. Why around midnight? God doesn't know what time it is. He didn't have a watch. Because Moses knew who he was dealing with. So if they got it wrong, if the Egyptians didn't have a clock that was set to the right time, they would say, no, it was 1 second past midnight, so it wasn't God who did this plague. It was another reason why it happened. Because when you want to deny God, when you have such a huge ego that everything that happens in this life is because of your doing or you're not doing, whatever it is, you're in control of everything. God wanted to set the Egyptians straight around midnight. He didn't want to give them a reason to say it was wrong timing. And it was exactly at midnight. So back to Moses and knowing your audience in life. It's interesting because people say, well, then Moses is just like me. He was also insecure. He thought he couldn't do the job. It wasn't that Moses was insecure with himself. Moses had a healthy ego to serve Hashem. Moses' ego was, I am so strong that I can annihilate myself in my inner ego, my inner wantings and desires. Moses knew how to vacate the premises to let God in. When you are so egotistical, you can't let in God, you can't let in friends, you can't even let yourself in. You don't even know who you are because you're posturing, your whole life you're posturing. Who are you? Moses did not think that he couldn't do the job himself with his speech impediment and everything else. Moses knew who he was dealing with. That they are so snobby and egotistical. Oh, who's coming to speak to us? Somebody who has a speech impediment? Oh, they're not good enough for our royal ears, our egotistical ears. Like during the war, when somebody wanted to convince a Nazi officer, to have some compassion, something. They didn't send the grandmother, please forgive my people, let us go. They sent a gorgeous girl, a pretty girl. Maybe she could blink, wink, help a few people, because you know your audience. It's not that the grandmother didn't have greater wisdom, greater compassion, greater vocabulary. Moses knew his audience. But the fact is that we are not in this life to do a marketing campaign, know my audience. You have to know yourself and you have to know God. I know myself. I have a talent of words, just let's say me personally, better in writing than in speaking. That's fine. I know my talent. I know my the things I have to work on. But I know one thing more than anything else, is that I want to vacate the premises, as did Moses, and just let God in. Not because I think I'm superior or I'm better. It's because I lived many lives. I interviewed people. I met people. I went, I did, I partied. I was dressing provocatively. I did so many things. And you know what? It's all BS in the end. And the only thing that lasted from all my experiences was my relationship with God. When my mother got sick, I prayed to him, not to the famous people I interviewed. When my father died, I had to rip, a garment, a little more exposure than I wanted to, as opposed to all the days where you exposed intentionally. It's all a world of lies. It's all ego. It's a fabricated existence. And my message today is to get real. Get out of the way. Know yourself. Know yourself. Always take your ego to task. Whether you feel low, whether you feel too high, be a real person. All your relationships will benefit from it. Most of all, your relationship with yourself. And that's why it meant so much to me. I silenced my ego in order to free myself. Because when you are too much and you're so clouded and muddied by all the definitions and all the things that you think you are, you can't breathe. You can't breathe. You can't be you. You can't let anything out that's true, and you can't let anything in that's real. Be yourself. See yourself. Take command of the moment. I'm going to end here because I can go on so long, it's almost scary. I just love Torah so much. I really love it. And it's so funny because people who know me in life know that I tend to be shy, and I was always a better listener than a talker. That's why I was a great interviewer. It's like I want to hear what you have to say. But when it comes to God, like Moses, and I'm no Moses, but he's my role model. So I want to be like Moses. I will speak, I will say what I have to say, and God willing, my message will be delivered. Okay? Shabbat Shalom, and stay safe. Wear your mask today, tomorrow maybe not.